All right, I hate doing it, but you love watching it. It's time to update the top 25. This is going to be the Week 5 2024 edition, the official Uncle Lou Top 25. Here it is. I'm going to explain what's going on here on 1 through 6. Don't worry. Of course, I do my best to explain the rankings. I don't expect you to agree with it, but at least I provide some reasoning and explanation. All right, so what are you going to do? My rankings are made up of a combination of a couple of things. I use as much objective data as I can. Facts, things that can't be argued or disputed. A team's record, who they've beaten. If they've lost, who did they lose to? How bad was the loss? All of that. Some of it is subjective. You can never get rid of subjectivity. That's opinion, basically, in a top 25 ranking, because every team doesn't play every team. So to some degree, at least, there's some opinion involved in where you rank teams. So here we go. I've got Texas at number 1, as you can see right there. I think they've got probably the best win of any of the top 6 or 7 teams. It's really 2 through 6 that I'm having a problem ranking. I don't think there's much debate for Texas to be number 1 right now. They've looked like the best or one of the best teams every single week. They played a game this past week without their starting quarterback. They still dominated with a backup, Arch Manning. They've got what could be considered the best win in all of college football, a blowout win on the road at Michigan, and they haven't struggled at all against any team, good, bad, or indifferent. So I think it's pretty obvious that they're deserving to be ranked number 1 right now. Do I think they are the best team in college football? I don't know. They could be. I think they could beat any team on this top 25. I think there's a handful of teams that could beat them. But when you look at what they've done so far compared to everyone else, I do feel like Texas has separated themselves a little bit and deserves the number 1 spot. Now let's talk about 2 through 6. Last week I had Georgia 2, Ohio State 3. This week I've got Tennessee 2, Ole Miss 3. Here's my reasoning. Do I think that Tennessee would beat Ohio State? I don't know. Do I think that Tennessee would beat Georgia or Bama? I don't know. Tennessee plays both Georgia and Bama later in the year. Teams 2 through 6 are all really good teams. They're really talented. They, at times, have played really well this year. They have blown out the majority of the teams that they've played in most cases. But there are a few things to me that sort of objectively that differentiate these teams. Some facts that we know about these teams, right? Tennessee has 2 wins over Power 4 opponents. Both of those teams were ranked at the time. Now, we know now NC State is not any good. So I'm not giving Tennessee some kind of huge bump for beating NC State. They're not very good. At the time NC State was ranked, we know that they're not any good. I don't give credit for what we thought a team was 3 weeks ago. But they blew them out. I mean, so they did what they were supposed to do, even if NC State is bad. This past weekend, they went on the road and beat a top 20 at worst Oklahoma team. You can make an argument to have Oklahoma within your top 15, and they're in the top 15 in a lot of polls and rankings today. I've got Oklahoma down at 17. I still think that was a good win on the road for Tennessee. A really good win. And they have not struggled against anybody they have played, no matter how good or bad they've been. Ole Miss has also not struggled against anyone that they've played. They've blown out every team they've played, Group of 5 and Power 4. They've only played one Power 4 opponent, and it was a bad one, Wake Forest. So, Texas has a better win than Ole Miss. Tennessee has a better win than Ole Miss. Georgia has a better win than Ole Miss. Bama at Wisconsin is a better win than anything Ole Miss has. Ohio State is probably the team closest to Ole Miss right now in terms of resume. If you're looking at just resume, Ohio State has yet to play any Power 4 opponents. They've played 3 Group of 5 teams. We'll talk about them in a minute. But even though Tennessee hasn't played any, even what I would consider to be good competition, Ole Miss, they haven't struggled at all. They've looked dominant in every quarter of every game. They've got a Heisman contending quarterback in Jackson Dart. They're a really good team. They have not struggled at all. I had a hard time at 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. I could have put in any order. I could have kept Ohio State at 2. I could have moved Georgia up to 2. I could have Alabama at 2. I could have Ole Miss at 2. You literally, teams 2 through 6 are really hard to rank for me. That's the bad news. The good news is that in a lot of cases, these teams are going to play each other. Georgia, for example, plays 2, 3, and 5. They play Tennessee, Ole Miss, and Bama. Ole Miss plays 4. Ole Miss plays Georgia. Bama plays Tennessee and Georgia. So a lot of this stuff is going to work itself out. But like in Georgia's case, they didn't look good against Kentucky. That's just the reality. And this early in the season, I don't think Georgia looking bad against Kentucky doesn't mean to me that Georgia's going 7-5. I don't expect Georgia to play like that every week the way they played against Kentucky. But we can't give free passes, I don't think, especially early in the season when you're trying to differentiate between 5 or 6 teams that you know are really good. You just don't know how good they are relative to the other teams. I don't know who's better right now between Georgia and Tennessee, or Ohio State and Bama, or Ole Miss and Georgia, or Tennessee and Ohio State. I don't know. So you're having to look at sort of, the who have they played deal. Have they struggled? In the case of Georgia, Georgia's played 2 Power 5 opponents, right? That's 2 more than Ohio State has played. Ohio State hasn't played any. Now, I'm not saying Ohio State hasn't played any Power 5 opponents to suggest that I think Ohio State can't beat any of these teams. But when we're coming to ranking these teams, we have to reward teams for what they've done, punish them for what they've done. And with Ohio State, there's not much to reward them for outside of beating 3 bad teams, which they've done to their credit. They haven't struggled against any of those teams. They've looked good, but we need to start see them playing some Power 4 opponents, which they start this week with a game against Michigan State. But back to Georgia. Georgia's played 2 Power 4 opponents. So that's 8 quarters of football. In 6 of those quarters, the offense looked bad. Now, I do think Tennessee's got a really good defense, and I think Kentucky's got a somewhat good defense. But that's not really an excuse. A good offense should be able to still score some points even on a good defense. Maybe you don't score 40, but you should be able to score more than Georgia's case, 13 or whatever it was against Kentucky, right? Or the first half against Clemson, they only managed 2 field goals, right? So they haven't looked dominant against Power 4 competition, Georgia, whereas Ole Miss has dominated everybody they've played, including 1 Power 4 opponent, Wake Forest. Tennessee has looked dominant every week, including two dominant performances against Power 4 opponents, one of which is Oklahoma. And Texas, of course, has the win on the road at Michigan. So that's how I arrived at this order 1, 2, 3, and 4. Again, this isn't a power rating, okay? A power rating is team 1 would beat team 2, team 2 would beat team 3, team 3 would beat team 4. I don't think Ole Miss is going to beat Georgia. I don't. I think it's a bad matchup for Ole Miss. I think Georgia will beat Ole Miss probably when they play. But I've still got Ole Miss ahead of Georgia right now because me thinking Georgia will beat Ole Miss is purely opinion, whereas there are some facts to look at here. Georgia struggled against Kentucky, only played good for 2 quarters against Clemson. Ole Miss has blown out everybody they've played and has a Heisman favorite at quarterback. There's reasons to put them ahead of Georgia, so that's why I've got them there. I've got Georgia ahead of Bama. That doesn't mean I think Georgia will beat Bama. In fact, they play this week, and I'm probably going to pick Bama to win that game. I think Bama has probably looked a little bit better. I think they're playing better. They're definitely playing better right now. If you go by, what did we just see? They were both off this past weekend. But if you go back to the most recent game for each of those 2 teams, it was Georgia not being able to get out of their own way against a bad Kentucky team, and Alabama going up to Madison, Wisconsin, and absolutely destroying them. So I'm leaning towards picking Bama in the game. I'm going to make a prediction video tomorrow. I'm leaning towards picking Bama to win. So me having Georgia at 4 and Bama 5 doesn't mean I think Georgia will beat them. I'm probably going to pick Bama to win that game. But Bama's got a bad game against South Florida, a Power 4 team. Georgia's bad game was against a Power 4 team. So Bama struggled against South Florida. I know what happened in the last 4 minutes of the game. I know what the final score was, but if you just watch the game, they didn't look good for 56 minutes of that game. It's just a reality. It doesn't mean anything. Again, that means nothing at all. Bama might beat Texas in the SEC title game for all I know. But we can only go on what we have seen, right? We can't go on what we think we might see later. So, Bama struggled against South Florida. Georgia struggled against Kentucky. If you're going to have a struggle win, I would rather have a struggle win against a Power 5 team than a struggle win against South Florida. And I also think Georgia has a better win than Bama. I think Georgia blowing out Clemson is a win that's looking better every week as Clemson continues to now blow out everybody else they play. Whereas Bama's best win is on the road against Wisconsin, which is still a good win. But I think Georgia's win over Clemson is more impressive than Bama's win over Wisconsin. So that's why I have that's why the rankings are what they are. It's not an indication of I think this team would beat that team. It's got nothing to do with it. I've got Ohio State at 6. I think Ohio State might be the most talented team in the country. I think Ohio State's got a good chance of winning it all. But the reality is we're heading into week 5 now, and we've yet to see Ohio State play a Power 4 opponent. Now, the schedule is what it is for Ohio State. I'm not punishing them for not playing a Power 5 opponent. I just can't reward them right now for a good win because they don't have any good wins just because of the way the schedule was set up. Again, they're heading into conference play now. So they got Michigan State this week. They got Oregon in a few weeks. Michigan at the end of the year. So we're going to see Ohio State play some increasingly good competition. And the other thing to keep in mind is the way the playoff structure is set up now. You got all these SEC teams bunched at the top. Doesn't matter. Only one of those teams is finishing in the top 4, right? Because you have to win your conference to finish to get a 4 spot. You have to win your conference to get one of the top 4 spots in the playoffs. So it doesn't matter that, and it's just, look, I can see the SEC bias or whatever now that y'all are typing in the comments. I think Ohio State can beat any of those teams ranked 1 through 5, any of them on a neutral field tomorrow. I'm not saying they would beat them all, but I think they have the ability to beat any of them. So this isn't, I don't have Ohio State 6 because I think they're not as good as the other 5. I've explained, I feel like I've explained it the best I can. I'll get some people in the comments that'll tell me to stop over explaining this. Then I'll get other people in the comments who don't understand anything I said and need me to explain it more. So I don't really know what the right way to go about these videos is. Like I said, I hate doing these videos, but y'all like watching them. I think any team in the top 7, be honest with you, 8. I think any team in the top 8 can win the national title right now. I don't think anybody outside the top 8 right now. I wouldn't pick anybody outside my top 8 right now to win the national title. I think your national title winner is coming from somewhere in this top 8 right here. That's just my opinion. I think these are the best 8 teams. I think any of them could win it. But that's my 1 through 6. So Texas blew out another nobody this weekend. Louisiana Monroe was the Arch Manning game. Tennessee, of course, 25-15 win on the road against Oklahoma. Ole Miss blew out another group of 5 team in Georgia Southern. Georgia was off. Bama was off. Ohio State beat another dead body. Who'd they play? Marshall, 49-14. Great. Ohio State, like I mentioned, plays on the road at Michigan State this week. So their toughest opponent yet. Georgia and Alabama play each other this week. Texas plays Mississippi State. So their first SEC game, it's a home game against Mississippi State, who's the worst team in the SEC. They'll roll again. Ole Miss plays Kentucky. So probably their toughest opponent of the year so far. Kentucky's not a good team, but they're better than anybody else Ole Miss has played. So that's what everybody 1 through 6 has done and what they have coming up this next week. There'll be a million comments telling me I'm an idiot down below. And what the hell? I agree with you. I am an idiot. I've got Miami at number 7. I've been very impressed with Miami. Very impressed. Blew out Florida in week 1. Dominated South Florida this past weekend, which is a group of 5 team. Their schedule will also start to get a little bit more difficult here now that they get into conference play. They host Virginia Tech this week on a Friday night. Weird things happen on Friday night games. We'll see. I like Miami to probably win that one, but we'll see what Virginia Tech can do Friday night down there in Miami, but I've got them at number 7. Cam Ward, the quarterback, him and Jackson Dart, to me, would be my Heisman front runners right now. I think what Cam Ward has done through the first month of the season or almost month of the season at Miami is unbelievable. He's putting up video game numbers. So is Jackson Dart at Ole Miss. Those would be my co-favorites for the Heisman right now. Oregon, we finally saw them wake up a couple of weeks ago. I've got them at 8. They were off this past week. They start Big Ten play this weekend with a familiar opponent, UCLA. Big Ten, or Oregon and UCLA, of course, been in the Pac-12 forever. Now they're in the Big Ten. Their first conference game is against each other. Oregon travels down to take on UCLA on the road. I'm looking for Oregon to keep it rolling. The first 2 games are what they are. Kind of escaped against Idaho. Had a game against, I think it was Boise State. where they, won by 10 or something, and then they blew out Oregon State 2 weeks ago, off this week. Big Ten play starts this week with UCLA. I look for Oregon to keep it rolling. Penn State at number 9. They're a wild card to me. I think Penn State has the potential to compete to win the Big Ten. I would still probably lean Ohio State or Oregon right now, a little bit ahead of Penn State. But they look pretty good outside of that Bowling Green game. Of course, they beat West Virginia in week 1. They beat Kent State this past weekend, 56-0. Kent State's horrible, but again, that's what you're supposed to do to horrible teams. Drew Aller is playing good. We'll see. But Penn State, I think, is a team to keep an eye on. I've got Utah at 10, and this is the most interesting team to me. They managed to win this past weekend without Cam Rising. That impressed me because they didn't have Cam Rising last year, and because of that, they took a massive step backwards in terms of their overall record, their ranking, and their placement within the Pac-12. They had been at or near the top of the Pac-12 for several years. Last year, Cam Rising out for the year, they lose 4 or 5 games. They had to go on the road this past weekend to play a decent Oklahoma State team without Cam Rising, and they got the job done. They won, and it was up in the air all week long whether he was going to play or not. I said, well, if I knew Cam Rising was playing, I'd take Utah. But if he wasn't playing, I'd probably take Oklahoma State at home. Well, turned out he didn't play, but Utah still got to win on the road. So I've got them at 10, but Cam Rising's got to stay healthy. And I think they're the least, well, I don't even think this is a hot take, but they're the least talented team in the top 10. All of these other teams in the top 9 recruit way better than Utah. They put a lot more players in the NFL than Utah does. In a lot of cases, they use the transfer portal better, more, and more effectively than Utah. I don't know that there's anybody in the top 10 that's more well-coached than Utah, and there might not be a more experienced team in the top 10 than Utah. Of course, Cam Rising is a 7th-year senior quarterback, and they're in the Big 12, so there's not a lot of hurdles for Utah to jump over in terms of making the playoffs. They've already beat Oklahoma State. Kansas State got blown out this past weekend by BYU. So how good is Iowa State? How good is BYU? What about, Arizona's already got a loss. Central Florida is undefeated and nobody's talking about them. The Big 12 is going to be interesting, but right now it looks like Utah's the cream of the crop there in the Pac-12. I moved Clemson up to 11. I had them at 15 this past week. I have now moved them up to 11. To me, they are clearly the best one-loss team right now. And they may even be better than some undefeated top 10 teams. What the hell? Sorry, phone ringing. I'm a professional. And please believe that. I think they're the best one-loss team. You look at some of the other one-loss teams that sort of maybe get thrown into that category: Michigan, Southern Cal, LSU, Oklahoma, Oklahoma State. I would take Clemson right now to beat any of those teams. I think they're better than any of those teams. The problem when you start to talk about Clemson is, again, when you get to the good win argument, they don't really have a good win. Now, they have 2 blowout wins over bad teams, App State and NC State, right? But the only decent team they've played, Georgia, they struggled to get a first down. Now, teams can get better as the season goes along, and if Georgia and Clemson played again this weekend, well, I just put it this way. So Georgia beat Clemson 34-3, I believe was the score. So that's a 31-point win by Georgia. If Georgia and Clemson were playing this coming weekend on a neutral field, do you think Georgia would beat them by 30? I don't. So we know some teams get better, some teams get worse. I think Clemson is a team that's kind of finding themselves offensively here as the season goes along. I think right now they're a much better team than they were when they played Georgia. Now, that doesn't matter. They already played and Georgia beat them. You don't get to go back and replay games. There's a lot of teams that would love to do that over the course of a season, right? Doesn't work that way. They already played. So they're at 11. They do have a loss. It was a blowout loss, but it was to a really good team. But they do look better than they looked in that game. So we'll see. They look like the second best team in the ACC right now. We'll see. It looks like it's going to come down to Miami and Clemson. You can see I've got Louisville at 12. They play Clemson, I believe, here in a few weeks. So that part of it will kind of sort itself out. Miami and Clemson do not play in the regular season. So if we're going to see that game, it won't be till the ACC championship game. But I've got Clemson at 11, Louisville at 12. Clemson plays Stanford this week at home it's a home game for Clemson. Stanford traveling coast to coast. Not a very good team. They did beat Syracuse last week, but that's another opponent Clemson should be able to handle. Louisville had a win against Georgia Tech this past weekend. It was their first Power 5 game of the year, or now Power 4, I guess. and they won convincingly, going away in that one, 31-19. They play on the road at Notre Dame this week. So a big game for Louisville. Now, it doesn't count as an ACC game, but the ACC potentially could get two teams into the playoffs, right? This is one of those games that you need to win. By you, I mean the ACC, right? A Louisville win over Notre Dame. Let's say Louisville beats Notre Dame, but ends up going 11-1 and loses the ACC championship game. So they're 11-2. They're not guaranteed a spot in the playoffs because only the conference winners are. They've got the two losses, but if they've got a win over Notre Dame, and maybe Notre Dame only has 2 or 3 losses at the end of the year, so that's a good win looks like a good win by Louisville. That's something that they could use to prop themselves up to potentially become a second ACC team into the playoffs. Just a possible scenario. But so big game this week for Louisville on the road at Notre Dame. Michigan, I've got at 13. That's all the way up from 20 last week. It's hard to know with Michigan, like what we're going to get from week to week. They, of course, have changed quarterbacks. They've away from Warren now to Orji and have basically abandoned the passing game. They attempted 12 passes this past week, but they won the game. They beat Southern Cal, drove down the field, scored the game-winning touchdown there in the last minute of the game, and Sharon Moore gets sort of his first big win of his career. I know he had big wins last year as interim coach. I'm sort of separating that from him now being the actual head coach. Big win at home for Michigan. Moved them up to 13. I'm not sure they're the 13th best team in the country. I'm not sure they look like a playoff caliber team to me. And they've got a lot of tough games remaining. Of course, Ohio State at the end of the year, but some other ones too. But this was a big win. I was low on them last week at 20 compared to where most other people had them. So it's a little maybe overcorrection from last week here, moving them back up for me to 13. The AP poll, I think, has them at 12 this week, and they host Minnesota. Southern Cal, I've got at 14. They're obviously just not quite as good as Michigan. It was a close game. They played again tomorrow. Southern Cal may pull it out. Same thing with Southern Cal LSU. Close game. They played again tomorrow. Maybe LSU wins. So I've got Michigan, Southern Cal, and LSU there, 13, 14, 15, just because, we've seen Southern Cal play both of those teams. They beat one, lost to one. So I've sandwiched them between those two. So Michigan 13, Southern Cal 14, LSU 15. LSU beat UCLA this week. They play South Alabama coming up. Southern Cal, as I mentioned, won on the road at Michigan. They play Wisconsin this coming week. So at home for Southern Cal, so you would expect them to win that game. And Michigan plays Minnesota. 16, I've got Missouri, and they probably need to be lower than this. 2 weeks in a row now, Missouri has underperformed. A one-possession win over Boston College a couple of weeks ago, and then this past weekend at home struggled to beat a really bad Vanderbilt team. It went to overtime. Vanderbilt missed a field goal that could have won the game. Something's off with Missouri. I was lower on Missouri than most other people anyway, but I didn't think they would be this. I don't even want to say bad. I mean, they're undefeated. They're not a bad team. You know what? Missouri appears to be struggling from whatever Oregon was struggling with in the first couple of games. Like, I'm not as high on Missouri as some other people are, but Missouri should be playing better than what we've seen them play the last 2 weeks. And for whatever reason, they're not. They were lucky to get out of that thing with a win. I've got them at 16. They beat Vanderbilt 30-27 in overtime. It was just a mess, just a sloppy game. I don't know what's going on with Missouri, but their schedule is less favorable by SEC standards, but they do play Bama. They do play Oklahoma. And the Missouri team that I've seen play so far this year will lose both of those games, no question about it. And they'll probably slip up and lose another game or two along the way if they don't get it figured out here pretty quick. But I've got them at 16. They're on a bye this week. Oklahoma at 17. So I didn't drop them at all. I had Oklahoma at 17 last week. They lost by 10 to Tennessee, who I think is a top 5 team. I'm not So what? I'm supposed to drop them even lower? Like I think that's about what I expected. Tennessee was a 7-point favorite. I picked Tennessee to win by 2 scores. They won by 10. So that's kind of the game I expected. Now, the whole benching Jackson Arnold and going with the other guy and all that, no. I mean, who could have predicted that? But am I surprised that in the end, Tennessee beats Oklahoma by 10? No. So I'm just leaving them where I had them. Got them at 17. I'm not going to punish them by losing by 10 to what most people think is a top 5 team. So I'm just going to leave them right there. They play this week, Auburn on the road. They're a better team than Auburn. This is one of the things that SEC people talk about with Texas and Oklahoma coming in the league is it's not just about, well, I'm better than this team, that team, that team. You know, it's sort of the week in and week out thing. Now, Auburn's a bad team. I would expect Oklahoma to win the game, but it's at Auburn. It'll be a crazy environment. Auburn's got a lot of problems. The quarterback, these two teams, Oklahoma and Auburn, have played 4 quarterbacks between them, and you may see all 4 of those quarterbacks play in this game between Tennessee and Auburn. But a messy quarterback situation from both those teams. But Oklahoma on the road at Auburn. BYU up into my ranking for the first time at 18. I'm notoriously low on BYU. I don't make a secret about it. I don't like BYU. I just don't like them. It is what it is. But I try not to I try to take personal bias out of my rankings. So the fact is, they're undefeated. They absolutely destroyed a Kansas State team that I had ranked 10th last week. Now, I look like a fool for having Kansas State ranked 10th, but the point is I was really high on Kansas State, and BYU blew them out. So I can't ignore that. I've got to reward BYU. I've done that. I've moved them all the way up to number 18. They play on the road at Baylor this week, and for reasons that I can't figure out, that game's only a 2.5-point spread. And Baylor's favored. So I don't know what's going on there. Baylor just got done losing to Colorado, one of the worst teams on the planet. BYU just got them blowing out Kansas State. And now all of a sudden Baylor's favored over BYU. Something's weird in the desert on that one. So be careful betting on that one. Something's up there. But I've got them at 18. I've got Iowa State at 19. They're the best team that nobody talks about. Literally nobody spends a second of their time talking about Iowa State. I'm guilty too. But they just continue to win week in and week out. They're at 18 in the AP poll. I've got them at 19 in my ranking this week. They beat Arkansas State 52-7 this past week, and they play on the road at Houston this coming week. So they're probably going to remain undefeated. Houston's really bad. Oklahoma State, I dropped down to 20. I had them at 16, and they lost at home to Utah. Now, based on the score alone, I might not have dropped Oklahoma State at all. I had them at 16, dropped them to 20. But the fact that they lost to a Utah team that did not have Cam Rising, that's not good. They continue to struggle to run the ball, which is just unbelievably, I can't figure it out. They've got 5 returning offensive linemen. They're all 6-year seniors. Their quarterback, 6-year guy, Ollie Gordon, best returning running back in college football, at least according to the numbers from last year. And they can't get a first down on the ground to save their life. Ollie Gordon's averaging 2 yards a carry. He's on a milk carton. I don't know. They appear to be headed the wrong direction. I moved them down to 20. Kansas State at 21. Again, they dropped 11 spots. So I had them at 10 last week because I'm a 5-star dummy. I dropped them all the way down to number 11. They got blown out by the Bicycle College on the road against BYU. So got to punish them for that. That's not good. Dropped them all the way down. They play Oklahoma State this coming week. So 2 teams that lost last week. Big game in the Big 12, big game for playoff implications, right? Because the Big 12 is a conference like the ACC that's not guaranteed. I don't think it's a guarantee either of those conferences will get 2 teams in. So you got to plan on winning that conference if you want to get into the playoffs, I think, right? Well, Kansas State lost last week. Oklahoma State lost last week, and they were both conference losses. They can't afford to take a second conference loss in the month of September if they plan on getting into the conference championship game and earning their way into the playoffs. So this is a huge game this week between Oklahoma State and Kansas State. So I've got them ranked 20th and 21st. Whoever wins will probably move up a couple of spots. Whoever loses may end up falling out of the top 25. We'll see, but that'll be a good game. I've got Notre Dame at 22. Don't know what to make of them. Got no idea. They beat Texas A&M. Wasn't all that impressed with them. They turn around the next week and lose to Northern Illinois. Just unacceptable. Blowout Purdue 2 weeks ago. This week, they pulled away from Miami of Ohio later on in the game, but it was they struggled with Miami of Ohio for most of the first half. So there's a hard team to figure out. The only thing I know for sure about Notre Dame, they aren't a playoff team. They're just not. They're not good enough. They don't have the pieces. The quarterback play is not good. They're too inconsistent. They're not going to be in the playoffs. That's the only thing I know about them. They may end up ranked somewhere in the top 25 at the end of the season, but they ain't a playoff team. I've got Indiana at 23. No one's talking about Indiana. I don't know why. Louisville and Indiana. Now, Louisville is even worse because they won the ACC championship last year and still, made the ACC title game, and still nobody talks about them. Indiana didn't do that in the Big Ten, but they're undefeated. They're blowing people out. Now, I get it. Hasn't been great competition, but they've looked really good so far early in the year. Indiana has. I don't even think, the AP doesn't even have them ranked. And we'll see. Maybe this week they lose by 50 points, and I'll throw them back out of my ranking too. But they're a team that has sort of surprised me early in the year. They're undefeated, and they're blowing everybody out. I don't know why I left Texas A&M at 24. I mean, I don't know what to do with Texas A&M. They lose to Notre Dame. They beat Florida. What good does that do? None that I'm aware of, but they're 3-1. I don't think they're a great team. They're getting ready to start SEC play, and in my mind, that means the losses are coming for Texas A&M. But again, I try not to use my top 25 as a projection of what I think is going to happen down the road. So I don't think Texas A&M's finishing the season ranked. I just don't. But they're 3-1 right now, and their only loss is to another ranked team, Notre Dame. So I've got them at 24. They play Arkansas this week. My guess is that they'll beat Arkansas because Arkansas is bad and poorly coached. But losses are coming for Texas A&M. And number 25, I've got Illinois. They beat Nebraska last week. Now, it was kind of a sloppy game, a game I think Nebraska should have won. I think other rankings have Illinois a little higher. The AP, I believe, has them at 19 or 20 or something. I've got them cracking my top 25 here at 25. That's where I had them last week. I had them at 25 last week, so I decided to just leave them there and drop Nebraska out. Now, Illinois is free to prove me wrong. I'll be happy to admit it. They play this week on the road at Penn State. So this will be their toughest test and in their toughest environment to date. Illinois plays pretty good defense. We'll see. I like Penn State in that one, but again, they did beat Nebraska, so leave them at 25, drop Nebraska out, bumped Indiana all the way up to 23. So, all right, there you go. That's it. That's my top 25. Group of 5, top 5. They stayed at 1. They're the only team on here with a loss, interestingly enough, but that loss is a 10-point loss to Oregon, who I think is a top 10 team. So I've got Boise State at 1. And number 2, I've got UNLV. They have, I think, 2 wins over Power 5 teams, and they're undefeated. So they got a shot too. James Madison just beat North Carolina. They're undefeated. Liberty, undefeated. Navy just beat Memphis. Memphis beat Florida State. Navy turns around the very next week and beats Memphis, who most people had ranked. I didn't, but most people had them in their top 25 last week. So Navy beat them. Navy at 5. So there you go. There's my group of 5, top 5. Boise State, UNLV, James Madison, Liberty, and Navy. All right. Appreciate you watching. Let me know down below what you think about my top 25. Tell me what your rankings would be, but particularly that 2 through 6. I'd be real curious how you would rank your 1 through 6. Again, I don't think my 1 through 6 ranking is right or wrong or anything. It is what it is. It's hard to rank those teams this early in the season. The good news is a lot of them start to play each other here pretty soon, starting this weekend with Georgia versus Bama. All right, hit the thumbs up, subscribe if you're new, and I'll talk to you again soon. Have a good morning.